We're excited to offer a variety of Bible studies this fall at CBF. Our co-ed studies include Grace and Eclipse, The Art of Parenting, Crown Biblical Financial Study, the Epistle of James, and Things to Know So You Can Grow. All the details about these and other classes and the links to register can be found on our website. We also have studies that are specific to men and women. There is Life with God, Discerning the Voice of God, and the Men's Wednesday Night Bible Study. And again, all the details about these great studies and classes can be found on our website as well as the links to register. Our Connection dinners are continuing through the summer and everyone is invited. Join us for a relaxed dinner with other CBF families. There is absolutely no commitment for coming, but we ask for you to RSVP at least 5 days in advance. Visit our website for more information or to RSVP, and you can direct any questions to Tammy Hogan.
Good morning. We're so glad you chose to worship with us this morning online. Just want to let you know we also have services in person at 9 a.m. and 10:45 on Sunday mornings. We'd love to see you there, meet you, get to know you, and welcome you into our community here at CBF. Now join us as we transition into our worship time.
Bring your pain that you've been hiding. Bring your scars, bring your shame. Every failure, every secret. Bring your fear that things won't change. Bring your dreams, bring your worries. Highest highs and lowest lows. Every hope you pin your heart on. Every hurt you can't let go.
To the one whose name is healed, to the one who came to save, to the one whose love is stronger than the power of the grave. Come and raise your hallelujah to the God who overcomes.
Lift your hands, lift your heart to the one. There is joy and sweet forgiveness, where the fount of mercy flows. Child of heaven, wait no longer. Hear the call, come back home.
To the one whose name is healed, to the one who came to save, to the one whose love is stronger than the power of the grave. Come and raise your hallelujah to the God who overcomes. Lift your hands, lift your heart to the one.
He is grace, He is peace, He is life, He redeems. Lift your voice, lift your eyes, give your praise, give your life.
To the one whose name is healing, to the one who came to save, to the one whose love is stronger than the power of the grave. Come and raise your hallelujah to the God who overcomes. Lift your hands, lift your heart to the one. Lift your hands, lift your heart to the
If you're our guest today, I want to say thank you for joining us. My name is Nathan Lee. I'm the Associate Pastor of Family Ministry, and I do have to share something with you. Since the last time that I was up here speaking, I met with my kids' lawyers, and I am contractually obligated not to tell any stories about them. So, that was, and they have a good lawyer. So it's going to be a real short sermon. I said that last hour, and it was 15 minutes longer. So I probably shouldn't say that right now. If you're just joining us today, we have been in a series called By Faith, where we're looking at Hebrews 11 and the heroes of the faith in the Old Testament. A couple weeks ago, I was asked by someone to see if we could go ahead and fill out all the names up there so you know who those pictures are. Somebody looked at me and said, wow, that looks like the ad for Lord of the Rings. But if you are paying close enough attention, you can probably figure out that that guy, second one from the end, is who we are talking about today, and you can figure out who that is. That is right. We are in the story in Judges of Samson. Samson, probably you grew up hearing all about him in Sunday school when you were a kid. He was incredibly strong. You know, you kind of had this image of him as he looked like Schwarzenegger, probably looked like that as a toddler. He was just walking around just beef, and picking up cows and whatnot. What we're going to find out is what you heard in Sunday school. There's some gaps. There are some things in the story of Samson that maybe we need to fill in for you to understand why Samson would be in the heroes of the faith. When you hear this story, you may be tempted to say, what was God thinking and inspiring the writer of Hebrews to put Samson in that list? But the truth is, the story of Samson gives us an incredible picture of how powerful our God is, that in spite of our behavior, despite our day-to-day lives, God is faithful to those who have faith in Him, that He will not abandon us, that He will work through us, work through imperfect people, to fulfill what He has set out to do. Now, last week, Brian led us through the stories. Actually, last 2 weeks, Gideon and Barak, we debated the pronunciation of Barak or Barak, so I'm going to say Barak, because I think that's much cooler. And when you get to Samson, you want your teaching team, the person on your teaching team, to be the perfect physical specimen to represent Samson, but Brian switched with me. So, here's what you got. But, truthfully, that's what Samson is about. I personally, after, for years, I've come to the conclusion that Samson probably looked like just some normal dude. Why? Because his power was not in his own personal workout regimen. It was in the Spirit of God coming upon him, which we're going to see. That everything that Samson does, as much as we go, why would God allow him to do that, is by the power that God provides him. Now, when Brian was speaking last week, he talked about, in the story of Barak, I'm going to stick with that, that a theme in that was passivity. That this leader, who is to be the leader of the army, comes to Deborah, the judge, and Deborah says, you're to lead this army out to defeat this opposing kingdom, and he says, well, only if you go with me. And she says, well, that's great, and the victory is going to be fulfilled because God's doing it, but you're not going to get the credit for it. Which is going to be another theme, the influence and the action and what women bring to the story is also present in Samson, which we're going to see early on. But if I were to pick a word to describe what we're going to talk about today, it would be the word compromise. Because compromising, for most of us, we think of the idea of two parties coming together to reach an agreement, and there's a little bit of a give and take, and we compromise. But I'm thinking of compromise in the way you might think of a plan that a crack commando squad has to go in and infiltrate, and then suddenly somebody leaks the information, and our plan's been compromised. It's been weakened. It's been broken. Maybe it's not going to work as well, so we got to come up with something new. Compromise is one of those things in the life of the believer that can be a terrible stumbling block to us. Does it mean that God is not faithful? No. Does it mean that God has failed? No. It means that we, by our decisions, have allowed whatever it is, whether it's the influence of the world, whether it's our personal desires, to interfere and become more desirable or more in our lives the driving force instead of God. And I think you will see that very clearly, that Samson is a character who compromise is a big part of his life. And yet he's listed in Hebrews 11 as a hero of the faith. So let's look at, if you want to turn to Hebrews 11, let's pick up where we left off. We're in 11:32 to 34. It says, "And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak, and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens being the foreign invaders, being those that don't belong there, because God had told them to go into the land and drive them out. Why? Because they would be the influence, they would be these pagan cultures that would bring the Israelites down. Now, when I read that, knowing that the first part of this chapter has been so detailed, we were joking the other day that what this appears to be is the author gets there and goes, you know what, just go read it for yourself. You know where it is. But truthfully, the author is absolutely right. We could spend so much time reflecting on these individuals that we see faith exercised, that God works through them. Tremendous things. Stop the mouths of lions, Daniel, right? Let's see. Quench the violence of fire, escape the edge of the sword, and Samson, I think it's very clear, out of weakness were made strong. And that's where we're going to pick up in the story of Samson. If Samson, as we see his day-to-day character, seems to have a tremendous amount of flaws, by the way, just like all of us, each and every one of us, then how can Samson be listed in this chapter about heroes of the faith? Now, let me go through the story as you might remember it in Sunday school. Are you guys ready? This is how I remember the story. Samson was a super strong hero who conquered the Philistines. Really strong. But after doing all these incredible things like killing a lion and ripping it in half and setting fire by tying a bunch of foxtails together and killing 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone, he decided to hang out with the wrong people. And he met this girl named Delilah. Oh, and Delilah was sneaky. And Delilah met a bunch of guys who told her, you know what? If you tell us the secret to Samson's strength, we'll pay you. And somebody told me it was about kind of the equivalent of like $15 million. So when you think about Delilah being paid off, it's not like, a week's worth. It's like $15 million she's set up for life. And of course, Samson, he's kind of thick-headed, and he tells her finally after she keeps asking him, and then they take him and they gouge his eyes out, and they tie him to this giant millstone. By the way, parental advisory. They take his eyes out, tie him to a millstone, he turns it around, then they have a big party where they want to take him up, and he's going to dance for him, and he's going to, be made fun of. And this will always bother me in the story. There was this boy, I don't know how old the boy was, but Samson said, take me over to the pillars, put my hands against them, and then he says, God, let me kill all these people because they're bad. And God says, okay, give your strength back. Oh, by the way, Delilah had cut his hair off, and with his hair cut off, he's not strong anymore. But his hair had started to grow back, so he started to get strong again. That's the story I heard. And Samson pushes, and the roof comes down and kills everybody, including Samson. Yay! That was the story. Why? Because we find that we worry that kids can't process all the things that happen in there. But if we're going to look at the story of Samson, we have to see ourselves in it, and we have to see God in the story. We have to see that it is very possible for a person who has placed their faith in God to live a life that does not reflect that, and yet still be a man and woman of faith. For us as believers, we place our faith in Jesus Christ for salvation alone. We receive that everlasting life by simple faith, and yet we can go wheels off and still have that eternal life. But yet we can forfeit what God has intended to reward us for a life of obedience. We forfeit the opportunity to be and see what we can be as part of his plan to its fullest, as we'll see with Samson. So we're going to begin with his birth, because his birth is very eye-opening. This announcement in Judges 13, it's very eye-opening to the condition of Israel at this time. So we're going to start in Judges 13, verse 1. It says, and again the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Now, we've talked about the cycle of Judges, right? The book of Judges. What was the cycle? The people would be living, following God, and then they would fall into apostasy. They'd start following false gods. And then God would allow another nation to come in, and they would begin to oppress the Israelites. And then the Israelites would get upset and cry out to God and say, God, please deliver us. God would raise up a judge who would come and deliver them. And for a while, things would be okay, and then they'd fall back into it again. It just kind of goes over and over and over. So here we have the very same thing. The children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And when we say evil, specifically we are talking about they have started to worship false gods. When you see that evil, it's very clear, it's very direct in the original that it's talking about worshiping false gods. But there's something missing from this statement. Did anybody catch it? Israel is not crying out for help. They have reached a point where they are comfortable being oppressed by the Philistines. The Philistines are going to oppress them for 40 years. This is going to extend to the days of Samuel. And ultimately, the Philistines will be subjugated completely by David, though apparently in between there, there'll be just kind of them nipping at the heels a little bit. But we see a nation, God's chosen people, who have progressed to the point where they're being oppressed by a foreign nation, but it seems that it's not that bad to them. They've either become comfortable with it or they've embraced it. But what we see very clearly is they are not crying out to God for deliverance. They're not asking for it, which we will also see later in the story when Samson is confronted by men of his own nation. But as we continue the story, starting in verse 2, we see this announcement to this woman. It says, now there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, indeed now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. He shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So right away, Samson is set apart because he is a judge who's declared that from before he's born. He's told, the angel of the Lord tells his mother, look, I have selected this son that I'm going to give to you because you are barren, this miraculous birth. I'm going to give this to you, him, and he will be my instrument. He will be a Nazarite, this vow that he will take to be set apart for my purpose, which, interestingly enough, the Nazarite vow was normally, before this, a short-term thing. But for Samson, it appears it is going to be lifelong. From the womb, he will be a Nazarite. And what he is going to do is to begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Samson is the beginning of what is going to be a process of driving the Philistines out. That's God's plan. It also tells us a little bit about where Samson is headed in his story. But this message is given to this wife of Manoah. We don't know her name. But she gives us this incredible, I believe, a good example when presented with what God desires for us of having and placing faith in that. Because she goes to her husband and says this, came to him and told her husband, saying, a man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God. Very awesome, but I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, or eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Now she doesn't mention the cutting of the hair, but that was part of the Nazarite vow. A Nazarite was one who, again, set apart for God, committed to not cutting their hair, not to touch strong drink, to be drunk, and also not to be unclean or eat anything unclean. Basically, you could think of this as touching a corpse. Had to keep themselves clean, had to keep themselves from being defiled by that. So that's kind of intrinsic and understood in the Nazarite vow. And so she shares that with her husband. Her husband says, wait a minute. Can we get the guy who told you this to come back and tell it to me? And so The angel of the Lord returns. Manoah goes out, asks the same questions. What are we going to do with this kid? And the angel says, let the woman pay attention to all that I said. She should not eat anything that comes from the wine or from the vine, nor drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. Let her observe all that I have commanded. Now, there's some debate about where Manoah stands on this. I have heard people say that he's this tremendous man of faith. I've heard people, commentators say that in this moment, what he's trying to do is he's trying to kind of take control back because the angel of the Lord appeared to his wife. And it's very clear that she has just laid out and said, this is what's going to happen. But he's kind of like, okay, hold on. Let me make sure that I got this straight. And once he's been told this, he asks the angel of the Lord, he says, would you stay and eat with us? Not entirely, I believe, convinced who this is. And he says, no, I'm not going to eat with you, but if you will prepare a sacrifice to the Lord, that's what I need you to do. And when they prepare the sacrifice, they set it on fire. The angel of the Lord ascends into heaven. And Manoah and his wife fall flat on their faces, which of course would be the appropriate response to that. And then the husband says something interesting. He says, then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. So Manoah said to his wife, we will surely die, for we have seen God. He's a little freaked out. But then here's her response. But his wife said to him, if the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have let us hear things like this at this time. I don't know about you, but that to me points to faith in what God has said. Instead of freaking out, instead of being nervous, she's very confident enough to think through this and say, if God said this is going to happen, this is going to happen, so we have nothing to fear. If he was going to kill us, he would have done it. But he's made this promise, and he's going to keep it. And so we have another example of where a man, has exhibited some weakness, which is reflecting the weakness in the nation, and his wife saying, well, no, and she's demonstrating faith in what God is going to do. And it says, then the woman gave birth to a son and named him Samson, and the child grew up, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Mahanadan between Zorah and Eshtaol, which I don't know if I said that right. It's such a cool story. Here's this announcement. I believe only the second angel coming and announcing a birth in the Old Testament directly. We know Sarah had the same thing way, way back when we were talking about Abraham and Sarah. But when we look at this, we sit there and think, why in the world is God raising up this champion? This is a birth narrative, if you will, but it also says something about God very clearly. That even though his people are not asking for it, God is sending help. Because it's his plan. Remember, he has promised them that they will be a great nation. Even though they are not asking for it, for his deliverance, he's sending it anyway. That will be very important through Samson, because many times Samson is going to do things that we're going to look at, and it's going to seem and appear and be truthful that he's doing things of his own will, of his own desire, and we'll look at that and go, why in the world would God use this guy? Because he's doing things that are just ridiculous. But then you have to go back and think, because God uses imperfect people. He uses flawed people. By the way, you're all flawed. Sorry. Nobody's perfect in this room. We're called to grow, we're called to mature, but the truth is we're not always going to be perfect. We're not going to have all of our days be great. Some days we're going to make mistakes, and yet God, as people of faith who have placed our faith in Christ, God still works his plan. And he still uses imperfect people. He's a patient God, but as we see with Samson, Samson's going to test that patience every step of the way, and yet still in Hebrews he's listed as a hero of the faith. And so we have his birth. It's awesome. It starts out great in chapter 13, and here's chapter 14. Then Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. So he came back and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. And after I was done this morning, my wife went up to me. She goes, oh, I knew that guy in college. She goes, everybody knew that creepy guy in college. But we see the first instance of one of Samson's downfalls. What is it? He's just traveling. He looks over and he sees this girl. And, oh, she looks good. Get her for me. The irony being, by the time we get to the end of his life, what's going to be removed? His eyes. But Samson's looking. He sees this woman. He desires her. He tells his parents, go get her for me. What's the big issue here? She's a Philistine. Samson's only thinking with what he likes. He's only thinking with his own desire. He's only thinking with what he wants. And his parents say to him, then his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Wait a minute, isn't there anybody in Israel that's good enough that instead of you walking over here and marrying this girl that we're not supposed to marry into, we're not supposed to intermarry with pagan nations, but here you are doing it, and you can almost hear him. It's like, I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. And Samson replies, but Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she looks good to me. Now remember, this is a time of arranged marriages. And the parents would select, and there'd be this whole process. But Samson's saying, you know what, forget about that. Just go get her. She's the one. It's just like, we used to joke in seminary. It was like these guys would show up on the first day of school, and they'd walk up to some girl and go, God told me that you and I, because I saw you from across the way, and he told me that I should come over. Yeah. Samson's just like, go get her. And his parents are like, no, that's not a good idea. Isn't there somebody here? But then, however, his father and mother did not know, this is verse 4, that it was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Now, did God make Samson go and marry this woman? No. Samson did this of his own volition. He wanted this. He wanted to do what his heart desired. God did not condone it. God would use it. Because remember, what is his plan? Is to drive the Philistines out, is to conquer the Philistines. In Samson's own sinfulness, desire, selfishness, God is going to use that, like I said, uses imperfect people to work out his plan. Now, this morning I tried to tell every story in Samson, and we went like 20 minutes over. So I'm going to give you kind of the abridged versions now. What we know is Samson went down to this woman's house. She's with her father, and he's going to marry her. And along the way, he gets attacked by what? He gets attacked by a lion. And it says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. To this point, we know that it said the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him. We saw that in chapter 1. When the lion attacks him, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily so that he tore him as one tears a young goat. So basically just ripped this thing to pieces. But don't miss the part that it's the Spirit of the Lord that came upon him. This is why I believe that Samson wasn't anything necessarily impressive to look at. Because what's God's ultimate plan? To show that he is the one who's doing this. That he is the one who is powerful. That God is the one who is the deliverer. Not this guy. He's not Hercules, right? He's not just some hero running around doing stuff. He is empowered by the Lord who is the ultimate deliverer. And so Samson kills this lion, rips him in half. Then he heads out. And so when he's coming back, he went down, talked to the woman, and she looked good. They keep coming back to it, and she looked good. Like, not like, hey, she had a great personality. Oh, I got to know her, and she was really cool. Nope, she just looked good. That is not the foundation for a marriage. When he returned later to take her, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. So he comes back, and there's this dead lion carcass, and it's got bees and honey in it, which, okay, let's be really clear. In that area, it was really dry, so probably this was just kind of a dried out husk carcass of an animal. And so he's got this honey here. What does he do? He doesn't go, oh, that's weird, and ooh. He walks up, he scoops it out, he starts eating it, and then he takes it to his mother and father. Remember the Nazirite vow? Do not eat anything unclean. I would consider, and God would say, that honey in the carcass of a lion is something unclean. So we have Samson marrying a woman who is of the Philistine nation, and now he is reaching into this corpse of this lion to eat food that is unclean. And not only that, he is giving it to his parents. Now let's think about how that mirrors the nation. Israel doesn't wake up one morning and all of a sudden just go, hey, we want to reject God. I don't know, maybe they did, but it doesn't seem that way. What was God's instruction to them? Is to do not marry into these foreign nations, because they will become an influence on you, and they will begin to seep in, and they will begin to influence and draw you off. Now, we don't hear much about Samson's family after this, but we know that this is almost, you can almost see the picture. As here he is with unclean food, just giving it to his parents and not even telling them. It's so subtle, but not even telling them that what he's done is giving them something unclean as people of faith that he shouldn't be doing himself. So they go back down to make a feast for the wedding, and while they're there, Samson's a trickster. He likes a good riddle, so he gives a riddle to the men there. When they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. So they're coming for the party. For the young men customarily did this. It says that when Samson said to them, "Let me now propound a riddle to you. If you will indeed tell it to me within the 7 days of the feast and find it out then, I will give you 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes. If you figure this out, you get a whole new wardrobe." Here's the riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. But they could not figure out the riddle in 3 days. But here's what they do. They go to his wife or wife-to-be, and they say, "Look, we need to know what this riddle answer is. And if you don't tell us or you don't find out, we're going to kill you." And here we have, again, Samson's rash behavior that's going to be on display. Because she eventually wears him down. And in frustration, he tells her the answer. She goes and repeats it to these men. They come back, give him the answer, and he realizes he's been caught. He's caught. They've answered. He owes them. So he did what anybody else would do. He went down to a place called Ashkelon and killed 30 guys, took their clothes and their linen, and brought it back and gave it to them. Said, "Here's your reward." Okay, Nathan, where's God in this? You got Samson, this flawed man of faith, who's acting rashly, and he's even going to acknowledge in the next chapter, he said, "This time I'm going to do it blamelessly." He says what he's getting ready to do in the next chapter, he almost like he reflects back and goes, "Yeah, that probably wasn't the best way to do it, but this time I'm going to do it right." But he goes on this rash killing spree, not any condoning of his attitude and his anger and his vengeance, because part of Samson's story is this cycle of vengeance. But God is still working. He is still working. God uses imperfect, flawed people. And it's hard to swallow that sometimes when we think about the kind of man that Samson sometimes demonstrates himself to be. And yet he's still in the hall of faith and the heroes of the faith, because he is a man of faith, which we will see coming up. So he pays them off. He comes back to his wife, finds out that while he left in his anger and went off, that the father went, "Well, he's not coming back, so why don't I just give her to this other guy, the best man," or whatever. So they go off. Samson comes back to get his wife. Father says, no, I gave her away, man. I got her sister, and isn't she more pretty? And Samson goes, "Okay, I believe you. I'll take care of it. Hey, I appreciate your honesty." No, he says this time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches and turned the foxes tail to tail and put one torch in the middle between two tails. Then he set fire to the torches. He released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines, thus burning up the shocks and the standing grain along with the vineyards and groves. Now, Samson, he never called off the marriage. He left. The father acted prematurely, I believe. But this is not the response. I'm mad, so I'm going to go burn everything down. Usually if I got dumped, I just went and cried in a room somewhere in the dark and said, "I'm never going to be married." And then my dad would say, "Get up." No, he says, "I'm going to burn everything down." So he goes out in the fields, he takes these foxes, he burns everything down. And so the Philistines come to the father of this woman and say, "We're going to burn you up." And they kill her. The terrible ending to that story when you think about it. It's an understatement. It says, so the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, since you act like this, I will surely take revenge on you, but after that I will quit. Not that he's going to quit for the nation. He's basically saying, I'm going to slaughter you until I can't do it anymore. I'm just going to keep killing and taking my vengeance out on you until I can't do it anymore. But again, he slaughters all these guys. He kills all these guys, these Philistines. As much as we are uncomfortable with it, God is still working his plan through a flawed individual. But now we get to see this picture of where the nation is in all of this. It says, then the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and spread out in Lehi. The men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? And they said, we have come up to bind Samson in order to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is that you have done to us? 3,000 men come to Samson and go, what are you doing? You're making life miserable for us. You are making it difficult. These guys are our rulers. We're doing okay. Remember, they've not asked for help. But they're going to this guy, this deliverer that God has raised up, as flawed as he is, and they've said, stop doing what you're doing. We've come to give you to them because we're tired of this. And here's the opportunity for Samson to step up and say, have you not seen what God has been doing through me? Let's rise up because God is with us. This is the chance to do that. This is the chance, as God, I believe, intended, was for Samson to be this example of God's strength in action for the people to rally behind. But he says no such thing. They said to him, we have come down to bind you so that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not kill me. So they said to him, no, we will bind you fast and give you into their hands, yet surely we will not kill you. And so they bound him up. Now, either Samson is feeling compassion for these guys. You know, I get it. You guys are beat down and you're weak. Or he's so confident in himself that he's like, yeah, go ahead, tie me up. This will be quick. We'll be done with this in no time. I think it fits probably more with his character, the latter. But when he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted as they met him, and the Spirit of the Lord, again, Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that the ropes that were on his arms were as flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds dropped from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, by the way, corpse. So he reached out and took it and killed 1,000 men with it. Killed 1,000 men right there, a place that he named Jawbone Hill. Now, up to this point, we've seen Samson eating food that's unclean. We're not positive, but it's very possible that at the wedding feast, he was partaking of the fermented drinks. But again, he reaches down, picks the closest thing he's got. He sees this jawbone. He slaughters 1,000 men, names the place Jawbone Hill. And then we have this moment after he has killed all these guys. And this is in Judges 15. When he had finished speaking, he threw the jawbone from his hands, and he named that place Ramath Lehi. And then he became very thirsty, and he called the Lord and said, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. Samson is acknowledging that God is the one behind this victory. In fact, it's probably very clear that Samson is acknowledging that he is God's instrument in what is essentially a holy war against the Philistines. That he is being used by God. Now, he can't quite not let his pride get in there a little bit, because he does say, by the hand of your servant. So it seems like he might be directing some of it back towards himself. But he acknowledges that these are the uncircumcised people who have come in and infected Israel, and he is the instrument to help drive them out. And he says, I'm thirsty. Do you want me to die here? God, I'm calling upon you in that moment for his physical deliverance. So God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore he called its name En-Hakkor, which is in Lehi to this day, and he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So we see God responding to the cry of his hero, of his judge. We see this man of faith sitting down there and saying, Lord, I'm calling out to you because You are the provider, and God is answering. God has not abandoned Israel. God has not abandoned Samson. He is still deliverer. He is still provider. In spite of Samson's flaws, in spite of Samson's character issues at times, God is consistent. God uses flawed people for his purpose. Now, this portion of the story has been divided down the middle of this. These are Samson's successes, and the next portion is kind of be the downward spiral. This is where things start to take a nosedive, a real nosedive. And that's the beginning of 16. It says, now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. Once again, Samson sees someone and goes, well, she looks good. Now, probably, as I understand, not a temple prostitute, but a prostitute as you would think. And Samson, once again, giving into his fleshly desire, sees this woman, goes in and says, let's have a good time. I don't know. When it was told to the Gazites, saying, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept silent all night, saying, let us wait until the morning light, then we will kill him. Now Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose, took hold of the doors of the city gate and 2 posts, and pulled them up along with the bars. Then he put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron. Now, either he went to the mountain opposite Hebron, as I understand, which is like 40 miles, or he went across from the city gate, stuck it in the ground in the direction of Hebron so that they could all see. It makes sense that he would stand up there, put these in the ground to the Philistines, kind of like a ha-ha. You didn't get me. But here's something interesting. At no point does it say the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. I'm wondering if this is Samson beginning that descent into thinking that this is all about him. I could be wrong, but it seems from here on out until the point where he faces his own death that Samson seems to believe that this is about him, or at least it's about the fact that he's got long hair. It's almost like he's forgotten that God has provided this for him. And it says, after this, it came about that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. He moves quick. Now we got Delilah. This is the most famous woman we know in this story. We're not sure. We don't know a lot about Delilah. Possibly a prostitute. Possibly, she has a Jewish name, so maybe she's a convert to the Philistine religion, or it's just one of those names, you know. Delilah in that area is common, so her name is Delilah. But Samson, once again, sees her, and he loves her, and so he's spending his time with her. And it says, the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and see where his great strength lies, and how we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. Notice that I really think they know his weakness. Entice him. They know his weakness is women. So use your feminine wiles on him. Don't just ask him. She says, please tell me where your great strength is and how you may be bound to afflict you. Guys, if a girl ever says to you, please tell me how I can defeat you. Women, if a man ever says to you, please tell me how I can defeat your superpower, don't tell them. Every comic book in the world tells us that. You don't see Superman standing in the street going, kryptonite, everybody, just throw it at me. We're good. You don't do that, but this guy is kind of thick-headed. And maybe it's overconfidence. No one's beaten me yet, so sure, let's have some fun with this. He said, if they bind me with 7 fresh cords that had not been dried, then I will become weak and be like any other man. If you do that, then, I will not be exceptional anymore. I'll just be like that guy. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh cords that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in wait in the inner room, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the cords as a string of tow snaps when it touches fire, so his strength was not discovered. And then Samson said, you're crazy. I'm out of here. No. with guys in the house waiting for him. He doesn't put two and two together, or he's just playing the game. It happens again. She asked them, "You've deceived me and told me lies. Now please tell me, how can you be bound?" He said to her, "Well, if they bind me tightly with new ropes, which has not been used, then I will become weak and be like any other man." So she goes and does it. "The Philistines are upon you, Samson, for the men were lying in wait in the inner room." It's like wash, rinse, repeat. This goes on. And then it's weave my hair into a loom, which is weird to me. But notice he's getting closer to the answer. She's wearing him down, but he's getting closer to the answer. Until finally he tells her, "Yeah, if you cut my hair off, all my power goes away." Is it that he cut his hair, his power goes away? Or is it that he has now broken his vow and the Lord's Spirit has departed him? Is it possible that Samson has gotten to the point where he really truly believes that this is all on him, that he is the one doing this, and that the hair is just some kind of talisman that brings him power? Has he forgotten that it's the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him to do these mighty things? Has he forgotten that he's part of God's plan? Is he so distracted by his own personal desires that he has overlooked what God has called him to do? And we know that they jump on him, they take him into custody after she cuts all his hair out, and then they poke his eyes out. Irony again. What got him in trouble a lot of time were his eyes, and now they're gone. Can't see. And they throw him in prison, and while he's in prison and he's tied to this grindstone, we hear that his hair starts to grow back. Is it the hair that's the power, or is it God? When you think of Samson sitting in that cold cell or strapped to that thing, what was going through his head? Was this his reckoning point? Was this the point where he comes and says, "I understand that this is God working through me. I understand now that this is the God I've put faith in, that he has always been faithful even when I have not." It's not explicitly in there, but when you hit that rock bottom, that's all you're left with. When I was in grad school, I made the decision to compromise and walk away from my faith completely. An actual prayer that I sat down, I said, "Lord, I don't want anything to do with you because you have done nothing but make my life miserable." By the way, it had to do with a girl. So I said, "You know what? I think I'm going to do things on my own for a while. Or maybe forever. I don't know. But you have not lived up to the expectation." And so I did everything I could. I lived. What was so funny is there were certain lines I wouldn't cross still. But I tried as much as I could to be as worldly as I possibly could, until the point where I was literally broken down to nothing. And since my family's not in this room, I'm going to share this. Broken down to the nothing, where I was sitting there in my living room with a knife going, "Why don't I just finish now?" And then there was this thought in my head. And I got really angry. And I got angry at myself. And I threw the knife down and I said, "You did this to yourself. God had nothing to do with it. And where you are right now is exactly where you were going to end up, because you compromised on what God had for you to embrace the world." Now, this is the first time I've probably shared that in a room this big. But from there, I was perfect. No. From there, I had a really long journey. I did. You don't necessarily recover from that overnight. But I had a really long journey, and I think this is possibly where Samson is he's reflecting on this, because it says that when they bring him into the temple to celebrate his defeat before their god Dagon, don't miss the fact that they are declaring that their God is more powerful than the God of Israel, than the God of the universe, because they bring Samson in and go, here is this hero, and we have beaten him by our God. And they take him to the center after they he's entertained them, and he's displayed before everybody, and he says to this boy, take me over there, put my hands against the pillars. And Samson puts his hands against those pillars, and he prays this final prayer. O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may at once be avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested and braced himself against them, the one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bent with all his might, so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed in his life. In that final moment of faith where he calls upon the Lord, he does more work in that moment than he did in his entire life. A man of faith who is called a hero in Hebrews 11, hero of the faith that God did incredible things for, comes to that rock bottom where he calls upon the Lord. Yes, he asked them to avenge his eyes. Don't miss that, yes. But how many times have you asked God, you've said, Lord, please help me this, and there wasn't just a little bit of selfishness in it. We're not perfect. But he calls out to God and says, give me, he acknowledges, this is from you, give me the strength. And he defeats these Philistines in this temple. And Samson, we find out, dies with them. And he judged Israel for 20 years. Possibly maybe the least successful judge. Did he ever raise an army? No. Did he ever call the people and rally them to repentance, to turn from those idols? No. In fact, the rest of the book is a continued downward spiral of the people. But when we look at this man and we think, is he a failure? The thing that stands out is that God is not. That God is working his plan. And that Samson, listed as a man of faith, despite what his life looked like, that each and every one of us in here who have placed our faith in Christ, we possess everlasting life. We have the decision to live by our own desires, by our own whims. We have the decision to live by God's plan, to live in obedience to him. We can trip ourselves up by compromise with the world. We can have ourselves tainted by the world by embracing the things it's offering to us, the sin, the selfishness, the things of this world that are not of God. We hear all the time about pastors falling from grace, that there's some kind of sexual sin, and people get just catastrophically disappointed in them. And it hurts to watch. But isn't it demonstrating in the worst possible way that what God says is true? That we have to live in continual connection to God in his word, in prayer. We are to abide in him so that we may grow and live lives as Christians, those who possess everlasting life, to live lives that are pleasing to him, so that we may experience at the end the reward he has for us for being believers who were faithful. Not just people of faith, but people who are faithful in their day-to-day lives. That's what Barkev said at the very beginning of this series. He said, we're talking about the privilege of living by faith every day and following God. The possibility exists that there will be people who reach the end of this life who are completely wheels off, but at some point they place their faith in Christ and they possess everlasting life. And they will stand before him as those who are entering into eternity with God. But what will he say to them when they stand before him? Will it be, well done, good and faithful servant? That's what I want to hear. But I know I'm not perfect. I know that there are times I compromise. I know that there are times I let my guard down, or I'm not depending upon God. I'm not abiding in him on a regular basis. And I see that in my flawed, personality and character that God is still working his ultimate plan in spite of me. So I challenge you to not compromise, to be totally sold out to this daily life of faith, that one day we can be counted with those heroes in Hebrews 11. And to hear him say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." If you'll bow your heads with me.
You come at the right time, when I least expect it, never behind. So why would I be surprised when you deliver every time? On mountain top you stay the same, in valleys low, Lord, you never change. And I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord. I'm confident as seasons change, your faithfulness remains. You go before me to prepare a blessing. You make a way. It's more than I could imagine, more than I can fathom or comprehend. On mountain tops, tell him, oh, you stay the same. In valleys low, Lord, you never change. And I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord. And I'm confident as seasons change, your faithfulness remains. Oh, it all remains. God of my present and God of my future, you write my story, you hold it all together. God of my present, God of my future, you write my story, you hold it all together. God of my present, God of my future, you write my story, you hold it all together. And I believe
Once again, thank you for joining us today for our online service. We look forward to seeing you at one of our 9 or 10:45 services in the coming weeks. Have a great week yourself.